It was one of those evenings that felt too perfect to be real. The chandeliers above the hotel ballroom glowed like captured stars, their golden light spilling across tables covered in white silk and crystal glasses. The air was filled with the low hum of laughter, the clinking of silver cutlery, and the soft notes of a live piano echoing from the corner of the hall. The guests were dressed in their finest clothes, their conversations smooth and confident, as though they belonged to another world altogether, a world of money, charm, and quiet pride. Among the servers weaving carefully between tables was a young waitress with tired eyes but an alert smile. She moved quickly, holding a tray filled with sparkling drinks, trying to keep her steps light and her mind calm. The night was long and the pay wasn't much, but she had learned to take pride in doing her job well. Her uniform was neatly pressed, her hair pulled back, and though her shoes pinched her feet, she kept her posture straight. She had been working at the hotel for almost a year, mostly during grand events like this one. Tonight was a charity gala hosted by a famous business family, known for their wealth and connections. The ballroom was filled with powerful people, the kind who didn't often notice someone like her. Still, she moved through the crowd as if invisible, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling politely whenever someone looked her way. Every now and then, her eyes drifted toward the piano. The musician playing that evening was well known in the city, a man with slick hair and practiced hands. His notes were flawless, but there was something cold about his performance. The melodies were pretty, yet they lacked warmth, as if he played only to impress, not to feel. The waitress couldn't help but imagine what she might play if she were sitting there instead. Music had once been her world, a dream she carried close since childhood. Her father used to teach her simple songs on an old upright piano that had seen better days. Those were the happiest moments of her youth. But after he passed away, the piano was sold to pay the bills, and life quickly shifted from dreams to survival. Even now, when she wiped tables or poured wine, melodies often floated through her mind. Her hands would twitch slightly as though pressing invisible keys, but she never spoke about it. Not to her coworkers, not to the hotel guests, and not even to herself for too long. Dreams were delicate things, easily broken, and she had already lost enough. As the night went on, the rhythm of serving became familiar. She carried trays, offered smiles, avoided spills, and watched as the pianist ended another polished piece. The crowd clapped politely, then returned to their conversations. The musician took a sip of water, nodded at the audience, and began preparing for his next number. But something unexpected happened. A moment later, his expression changed. He leaned toward the event organizer seated near the stage, whispered something, then stood up abruptly. There was a faint murmur as people noticed him walking away. His assistant followed behind, trying to calm him down, but the musician looked irritated. The sound of the piano faded, leaving an awkward silence in the hall. The organizer, a man with a deep voice and nervous energy, stepped up to the microphone. He explained that the pianist had suddenly fallen ill and would be unable to continue the performance. The crowd let out a mix of surprise and disappointment. After all, music was the heart of the evening, the elegant background that kept the night alive. Without it, the room felt strangely hollow. The organizer tried to make light of it, promising they would play recorded music instead. But just as he was about to signal the sound crew, someone's voice spoke softly from behind him. "Excuse me, I can play." It wasn't loud, but in that sudden silence, every head turned. The voice belonged to the waitress. She stood a few steps from the stage, her tray now empty, her hands trembling slightly. Her face was calm, though her heart raced so fast she could hear it in her ears. The organizer blinked at her, clearly confused. "You can play the piano?" he asked, trying to keep his tone polite. She nodded once. "Yes, sir. If you'd like, I can help until he returns." A small wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some guests smiled with mild amusement. Others looked skeptical. It was one thing to serve drinks. It was another to fill in for a professional pianist at an elite event. The organizer hesitated, looking at the audience, then back at her. He didn't know what else to do. The atmosphere was slipping and all eyes were on him. "All right," he finally said. "If you're sure, go ahead." The young woman stepped onto the stage, feeling dozens of eyes following her. The lights above were brighter than she had imagined, almost blinding. She took a slow breath, reminding herself not to rush. As she sat down, her fingers hovered over the keys. The piano was a grand Steinway shining like black glass, and she could see her faint reflection in it. Nervous but determined for a few seconds, she did nothing but close her eyes and listen to the air, to the murmurs, to the rhythm of her heartbeat, and then gently she began to play. At first her touch was soft, uncertain, almost shy, but soon the notes began to flow, smooth and alive, like a river finding its way through quiet woods. The melody she chose wasn't from any famous composer. It was something she had written herself years ago, during long nights when the world felt heavy and the only thing that made sense was sound. It was a simple tune full of warmth built on memory and longing. The hall grew still. Conversations faded. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even the servers near the back turned their heads. The music filled the room, not loud or showy, but honest. Every note carried emotion, not technique. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it reached people in a way polished performances rarely did. The organizer stood frozen, watching her hands move gracefully across the keys. He hadn't expected this, no one had. The elite guests, who just moments ago had looked down their noses in quiet judgment, now sat transfixed. The melody rose and fell like breath itself, gentle yet powerful. As she played, memories came rushing back to her. The small apartment she grew up in, her father's laughter as he hummed along, the sound of rain tapping on the window as she practiced. For the first time in years, she felt that part of herself returning, the part she thought she'd lost to life's endless struggles. When the last note faded, there was a pause, a long, weightless pause where no one seemed to move. And then, as if waking from a spell, the entire room burst into applause. It wasn't polite or restrained. It was full and genuine. The sound filled every corner of the hall. She blinked, startled, unsure how to react. Her cheeks turned red as she stood up slowly. She didn't bow or smile widely. She just nodded quietly and stepped away from the piano, her heart still racing. The organizer hurried over, shaking her hand with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Where did you learn to play like that?" someone from the crowd called out. She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "My father taught me," she said softly. That simple answer seemed to touch something in the audience. The applause started again, even louder this time. A few people stood up, clapping with genuine admiration. The moment felt unreal. Just minutes ago, she had been invisible, a nameless waitress in a sea of glittering gowns and expensive suits. Now every eye in the room was on her, not because of her uniform, but because of her music. The organizer asked if she could play another piece, but she shook her head. "That's enough for tonight," she said gently. Her voice was steady now, calm and filled with quiet dignity. As she returned to her duties, several guests stopped her to offer compliments. Some wanted to know her name. Others asked if she performed anywhere. She smiled and thanked them, but kept her answers brief. She wasn't used to attention, and part of her feared it might fade as quickly as it came. But one thing was certain: the night had changed something. She could feel it deep inside. Maybe it wouldn't lead to fame or fortune, but it had awakened the dream she thought was gone forever. And in that crowded ballroom filled with people who measured worth in wealth and status, a simple waitress had reminded everyone of something money could never buy: the power of pure, heartfelt talent. As she carried her tray back to the kitchen, the faint echo of the piano still lingered in the air, warm and unforgettable. The next morning, the hotel felt different. The quiet hallway still smelled of polished wood and perfume from the night before. The young waitress arrived early, as she always did, but there was a new kind of energy around her, an invisible current running through her thoughts. She had hardly slept. Her mind kept replaying the moment she sat at that piano, the look on people's faces, the sound of applause that felt too big, too real. It all seemed like a dream, one she was afraid might disappear if she thought about it too much. In the staff room, a few of her co-workers were already getting ready for the breakfast shift. One of them looked up as she walked in and smiled. "You're famous now," he said jokingly. "Half the staff was talking about you last night." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I'm not famous," she said. "I just played a song, but it wasn't just a song." Everyone in the hotel had heard the story by now. Even the kitchen workers who hadn't been at the gala knew about the waitress who took the stage when the pianist left. Some said she was brave, others said she was crazy, but they all agreed that she had played beautifully. As the morning went on, she returned to her routine, serving guests, clearing tables, making sure everything was perfect. But people kept stopping her. A few of the guests who had attended the event recognized her and offered kind words. One lady even left a note with her tip that read, "Never stop playing." Each word felt like a spark inside her chest. She tucked the note into her pocket and carried on working, though her thoughts drifted more than usual. She didn't tell anyone, but after her shift, she went back to the ballroom. It was empty now, silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. The chairs had been stacked neatly and the tables were bare. But the piano was still there, closed, polished, untouched since the night before. She walked up to it and rested her hand gently on the lid. For a moment she stood there, unsure if she should open it again. Then slowly she lifted the cover and pressed one key. The note rang softly, echoing through the empty room. She sat down and played a few quiet chords, smiling to herself. This time there was no pressure, no audience, no fancy dresses or watchful eyes. Just her and the music. As she played, she didn't notice that someone had entered the room. It wasn't a guest this time, it was the event organizer from the night before. He stood near the door listening quietly. When she finally stopped and turned around, she jumped a little, startled to see him there. "Sorry," he said with a smile. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to say thank you again. You really saved us last night?" She nodded politely, feeling a bit shy. "It was nothing, sir. I just didn't want the evening to end like that." He chuckled. "Nothing? You had everyone in that room frozen in their seats. I've never seen that kind of reaction at one of our events." He walked closer, his tone becoming gentler. "You've clearly been playing for a long time." "Since I was a kid," she admitted. "But I haven't practiced in years. Not properly." He looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, "You have a gift. You shouldn't hide it." She smiled faintly, unsure what to say. Compliments always made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to people noticing her for anything other than how quickly she could carry a tray. The organizer took out a card and placed it on the piano. "I organize charity events across the city. Sometimes we need live performers. If you ever want to play again, give me a call." She looked down at the card, surprised. "Thank you," she said quietly. When he left, she sat there for a while longer, holding the card between her fingers. It felt strange, like a small door had just opened in front of her. A part of her wanted to walk through it. Another part whispered that it was foolish, that dreams never paid the bills. That night, when she returned home to her small apartment, she placed the card on her desk beside a framed photo of her father. The picture was old and slightly faded. She looked at it and smiled softly. "I played again," she whispered, "just like you taught me." Over the next few days, her life at the hotel continued as usual. But the memory of that night stayed with her like a warm light. Every time she passed the ballroom, she would glance at the piano. Sometimes, if the room was empty, she would sneak in for a few minutes and play quietly to herself. One afternoon, as she was taking her break in the staff area, the hotel manager came in with a few papers in hand. He looked around until he saw her. "There you are," he said. "I've been meaning to speak with you." She stood up quickly, worried she might be in trouble. "Did I do something wrong?" The manager smiled. "Not at all. Quite the opposite. The guests from the charity event left wonderful feedback about you. A few even called the hotel asking for your name." Her eyes widened. "They did?" "Yes," he said, nodding. "Apparently one of them even offered to sponsor music lessons for you if you're interested." She blinked in disbelief. "Music lessons?" "That's right. They didn't leave a name, but they said it was a way to thank you for what you did that night." For a moment she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened and her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "That's very kind," she managed to say. The manager smiled again. "Take some time to think about it. If you decide yes, I'll pass along the message." After he left, she sat there quietly, holding her hands together. It had been years since she'd taken a real lesson. Life had always gotten in the way. Bills, rent, long shifts. But now, for the first time, it seemed possible again. Later that evening, as she left work, she walked past the park near the hotel. The city lights shimmered across the pond, and she found herself sitting on a bench, thinking about the path that had brought her here. She remembered all the times she had almost given up, when she'd worked double shifts to keep her apartment, when she'd sold her father's piano, when music had felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. And yet, here she was being given a second chance. The next morning, she told the manager she wanted to accept the offer. He smiled and said he would make the arrangements. A week later, she found herself standing outside a small music studio in the city. The building was old but charming, with a large window displaying violins, guitars, and sheet music. She felt nervous as she stepped inside, but the smell of wood and paper instantly calmed her. The instructor, an older woman with kind eyes, greeted her warmly. "You must be the one from the hotel," she said. "I've heard a lot about you," she smiled shyly. "I'm just someone who loves to play." The instructor chuckled softly. "That's the best kind of musician." Over the next few weeks, she began lessons again. At first, her fingers felt stiff and her timing was off, but her passion was still there, strong and alive. Slowly, the music returned to her hands and her confidence grew. The instructor encouraged her to write her own pieces again, just like she used to. Outside of work, she began spending her evenings at the piano, practicing late into the night. Sometimes she recorded her sessions on her phone, not for anyone else, but just to hear her progress. It reminded her that growth wasn't about speed, it was about persistence. One evening, as she was leaving the studio, she ran into the event organizer again. He was standing by his car, smiling when he saw her. "I thought I recognized you," he said. "How's the music coming along?" She laughed softly. "Better than I expected. I'm learning again." "That's great to hear," he said. "Actually, I'm organizing another charity dinner next month. Would you be interested in performing?" "Just one piece." Her heart skipped a beat. "Me, perform again?" He nodded. "Yes, I think people would love it." She hesitated. The thought of playing in front of that kind of crowd again terrified her. But then she remembered how it felt that night, the peace that came when she touched the keys, the sound of honest applause. "All right," she said finally, smiling. "I'll do it." The organizer grinned. "Good. I'll be in touch with the details." As she walked home that night, the city lights seemed brighter. The world hadn't changed much, but she had. The girl who once thought her dreams were gone forever was now preparing to play for an audience again. She didn't know where this road would lead. Maybe it wouldn't lead to fame or riches, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she had found her music again, and with it a piece of herself she thought she'd lost. When she got home, she sat by her small window, looking out at the quiet street below. Her reflection in the glass looked peaceful. "Content," she whispered softly. "Thank you. Dad, I'm really playing again." And as the night deepened around her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Steady and real, like a song she would never forget. The weeks passed quickly, and the city slowly shifted from the warmth of summer to the quiet chill of early autumn. The waitress had started to feel a new rhythm in her days. Work at the hotel during daylight, practice at the small studio in the evenings, and a few hours of rest before the next shift. Life was still busy, but now it carried a quiet purpose. The upcoming charity dinner weighed gently on her mind. Every time she sat at the piano, she imagined that room again, the soft lights, the polished floor, the curious faces. She tried not to think about the pressure, but the thought always found her. She wanted to play perfectly, but more than that, she wanted to play honestly, just like she had the first night. Her instructor noticed her tension one evening. After hearing her stumble through a piece she had played flawlessly the day before, the older woman smiled kindly and said, "You're thinking too much. Music doesn't live in your head. It lives here." She touched her chest softly. "Play with your heart, not your fear." Those words stayed with her. The next time she sat down to practice, she closed her eyes and let go of the notes, letting her fingers move naturally. The melody that came out wasn't what she planned, but it was full of warmth, full of truth, and in that small moment she felt free again. A few days later, she received the official invitation to perform. The envelope was thick and white, the kind that looked expensive even before it was opened. Inside was a note from the event organizer, thanking her for agreeing to play and reminding her of the date and time. He had also written a small line at the bottom, "You don't have to impress anyone. Just be you." She smiled at that. Simple words, but they meant more than he probably realized. At the hotel, things had changed a little too. Some of the guests now recognized her as the girl who played at the gala. They treated her with a mix of curiosity and respect. The other servers often teased her in good fun, calling her our star pianist. She laughed with them but never let it get to her head. She was still the same worker, still trying to make ends meet, but inside something was shifting. For the first time in years, she was beginning to believe in herself again. One evening after her shift, She stayed behind to help the staff arrange the ballroom for a new event. The chandeliers glittered as they were cleaned, and the air smelled faintly of wax and flowers. As the others finished up, she wandered to the piano again. It was the same grand instrument she had played that first night. She sat quietly for a moment before lifting the cover and pressing a single note. The sound lingered, soft and clear. She began to play, not loudly, just enough for herself to hear. A gentle tune floated through the empty hall. She didn't notice that one of the cleaning staff had stopped to listen from the doorway. When she finally finished, the man smiled and said, "You play like someone who's telling a story." She looked up a little surprised. "A story?" He nodded. "Yes, some people play notes. You play feelings." She smiled at that, grateful. Maybe that's all I've ever wanted to do. The night of the charity dinner came faster than she expected. She had barely slept the night before. Her small apartment was filled with sheet music scattered across the table, though she already knew what she would play. She had written a new piece, a gentle melody that spoke about finding light again after darkness. It didn't have a name yet, but to her it felt like a conversation with her father. At the hotel, the staff was busier than usual. The guests began to arrive early, dressed in glittering gowns and sharp suits. This event was even grander than the last one, with the city's most known faces in attendance. She arrived an hour early, wearing a simple but elegant black dress lent to her by the hotel staff. They said she couldn't play in her uniform this time. She felt shy as she entered the ballroom, her hands trembling slightly. The organizer saw her and came over immediately. "You look ready," he said warmly. "How are you feeling?" "A little nervous," she admitted with a small laugh. He smiled. "Good. That means you care." He led her to the piano, where a small microphone had been set up beside it. "You'll start after dinner," he said. "No rush. Just enjoy the moment," she nodded, trying to steady her breath. She spent the next hour in the background, watching people chat and laugh. The waiters moved gracefully between tables, and she felt a strange mix of nostalgia and pride. She had been one of them not long ago. In many ways, she still was. When the last plate was cleared and the lights dimmed slightly, the organizer walked up to the microphone to announce her. His words were kind and simple, telling the guests about the waitress who had once saved a night of silence with her music. There was a soft wave of applause as she stood up and walked toward the piano. The lights felt warm on her face. She could feel her heartbeat in her hands, but when she sat down, everything went quiet inside her. The noise of the crowd faded. The world seemed to narrow down to her, the keys and the moment. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft, like a whisper. Then the melody grew layer by layer, flowing like water over smooth stones. It was gentle but full of life, sadness and joy woven together in a single voice. The tune spoke of struggles, of small hopes, of standing up again when life pushed you down. It was her story, told without a single word. The audience fell silent. The sound filled the room, wrapping everyone in something pure and unexplainable. A few people leaned forward, completely still. Others had tears glistening in their eyes without understanding why. Halfway through, she glanced toward the corner of the room. The organizer stood there, smiling proudly. And for a split second, she thought she saw her father standing beside him, just watching quietly. She knew it wasn't real, but the warmth that filled her chest made her believe it could be. The music climbed higher, then softened again until it ended in a single gentle note that lingered before fading away. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was thick, almost sacred. Then slowly, the applause began. Soft at first, then rising until it filled the hall. People stood up one by one, clapping with genuine admiration. She sat still for a second, overwhelmed, then stood and gave a small nod. She didn't need to say anything. The music had said it all. As she stepped away from the piano, the organizer met her halfway and shook her hand. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "You've just given them something they'll remember for a long time." She smiled, her eyes a little wet. "Thank you for letting me play." After the event ended, several guests approached her. Some offered compliments, others asked where she performed. One elderly woman pressed a small card into her hand and said, "You should record that song. People need to hear it." That night, as she walked home under the cool autumn air, she felt lighter than she had in years. The city lights reflected off wet streets, and for the first time she didn't feel invisible. She wasn't rich or famous, but she had found her place again. In music, in courage, in herself when she got home. She placed the small card from the woman on her desk beside her father's photo, and the first card from the organizer. Her small apartment suddenly felt full, not of things, but of meaning. She sat by the window with her old notebook and began writing down the notes from her new song. She decided to give it a name, The Promise. It wasn't a promise to the world. It was to herself. A promise that no matter how hard life got, she would never stop playing again. The next day at work, everyone congratulated her. Even the hotel manager smiled proudly and said, "You've brought us more good attention than any advertisement ever could." She laughed softly, grateful, but humble. "I just did what I love," she said. Over the next few days, life began to move normally again. But deep down, she knew things would never be quite the same. People had started reaching out to her, local cafes asking if she could play in the evenings, a small recording studio offering to help her record her song for free. It was all new, all uncertain, but it felt right. Sometimes at night, when the world was quiet, she sat at her small keyboard at home and played softly until she fell asleep. The music had once been a dream she buried. Now it was her reality, and it carried her forward. She often thought of that first night, the silence after the pianist left, the courage it took to step up, and the magic that followed. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for sure: sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen when ordinary people decide to stop hiding what they love. And for her, that decision had changed everything. The morning after the charity dinner, the city seemed brighter than usual. The waitress woke up early, even though she had gone to bed late the night before. The echo of applause from that grand ballroom still lingered in her ears. She sat at the small table by her window, sipping tea and looking out at the street below. People were rushing to work, cars honked, and a street vendor was setting up his cart. Life went on as always. But something inside her had changed. For the first time in years, she felt alive in a way that was hard to describe, not because people had clapped for her, but because she had found courage she didn't know she had. She had played from her heart, and that moment had opened a door she once thought was locked forever. Later that morning, as she arrived at the hotel, she noticed that even her co-workers looked at her differently now. The manager greeted her with a proud smile, and the staff in the kitchen waved and teased her as she passed by. "The star returns," one of them joked. She laughed softly and shook her head. "I'm still the same girl," she said, tying her apron around her waist. But deep down she knew she wasn't quite the same. Something inside her had shifted. A quiet confidence had begun to grow. Around lunchtime, while she was serving in the dining hall, the hotel phone rang at the front desk. A receptionist called her over. "Someone's asking for you," she said with a smile. "They said they heard you play at the charity dinner." She hesitated for a moment, surprised. Then she walked to the phone and picked it up. The voice on the other end was warm and steady. "Hello," it said. "I was at the event last night. You played beautifully. I hope you don't mind me reaching out." "Thank you," she said, unsure what else to say. "I run a small music studio downtown," the caller continued. "We help young musicians record their first songs. I'd love to invite you to visit. You have something rare, honesty in your playing. You should let the world hear it." She felt her heart skip a beat. "That's very kind of you," she said softly. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." "There's no rush," the voice replied gently. "Just think about it. If you decide to come by, you'll be welcome anytime." When the call ended, she stood quietly for a moment holding the phone. The world around her buzzed with noise. Guests chatting, dishes clinking. But inside she felt a strange calm. Maybe this was another door opening. That evening, as she walked home, she thought about what the man had said. A small recording studio. Her own music. The idea both thrilled and scared her. She didn't want fame. She didn't even think she was good enough for something like that. All she wanted was to keep playing, to keep that part of her father's memory alive. When she reached home, she took out her old notebook, the one filled with unfinished melodies and lyrics written in faded ink. She turned the pages slowly, remembering the nights she used to sit by her window, dreaming of one day playing for people who listened. She hadn't imagined it would actually happen. The next few days were busy at the hotel. But even during work, she caught herself humming quietly or tapping rhythms on the edge of the tray she carried. Her coworkers noticed and teased her for always being lost in her music. She didn't mind. It was true. She was living in two worlds now, one made of work and routine and another made of sound and hope. By the end of the week, she decided to visit the studio. She didn't tell anyone. She just went after her shift, still in her uniform with her hair tied back. The studio was small but warm, tucked between a bookstore and a coffee shop. The walls were covered with photos of smiling musicians, and instruments were scattered everywhere. Guitars leaning against the wall, a drum set in the corner, and a large piano near the window. The man who had called her greeted her with a kind smile. "You came," he said, pleased. She nodded. "I wanted to see what this place is like." He showed her around, explaining how they helped artists record and share their music. Then he asked if she'd like to play something, just to hear how she sounded in the room. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the keys. The first note was soft, almost uncertain. But as she began to play, the nervousness melted away. The sound filled the studio and clear, gentle, real. When she finished, the man looked impressed. "You have something special," he said quietly. "It's not just skill. It's emotion. That's what people connect with." She smiled, embarrassed but grateful. "I just play what I feel," she said. "That's the best kind of music," he replied. "If you'd like, we could help you record one of your pieces. No pressure, no cost. Just for you." She thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'd like that," she said. Over the next few weeks, she visited the studio whenever she could, usually after long shifts. She worked hard, often arriving tired, but once her hands touched the piano, the exhaustion faded. She poured her heart into each note, recording her song over and over until it felt right. The piece she chose was the one she had played at the charity event, "The Promise." The day the final recording was done, she listened to it through the studio speakers. Hearing her own music fill the room made her eyes water. She couldn't believe it was her. It sounded full, alive, and true. The studio team offered to upload it online. "People will want to hear this," they said. "Trust us." She hesitated at first, but then agreed. She didn't expect much from it. She didn't even tell her coworkers. She just went back to her normal life, work, home, practice. But within a week, something unexpected happened. One morning, as she was serving breakfast at the hotel, the manager came rushing toward her with his phone in his hand. "You won't believe this," he said excitedly. "Your song, it's all over social media. People are sharing it everywhere." She froze, her tray in hand. "What?" He showed her the screen. There it was, her name, her song, her story. The video had been posted by someone who had recorded her performance from the charity dinner. It had spread quickly, reaching thousands of people who were touched by the story of the waitress who played from her heart. Messages began pouring in. Strangers thanking her for the music, telling her how it gave them hope, how it reminded them of something they'd lost. She read every message with disbelief, tears filling her eyes. The next few days were a blur. Local reporters called the hotel asking to interview her. A few small music shows invited her to perform. It was overwhelming, but she remained calm. She reminded herself that this was never about fame. It was about sharing something honest. When she visited the studio again, the man smiled proudly. "See, I told you. People feel what you play." She laughed softly, still amazed. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," he said. "Just keep doing what you're doing." In the following weeks, she played at a few local events, small cafes, charity dinners, and even a community center concert. The audiences were humble, the stages small, but she cherished every moment. Each performance felt like a conversation with strangers who understood her language, music. But even as her story spread, she stayed grounded. She still worked at the hotel, still greeted guests with her gentle smile, still helped clean tables after events. Fame didn't change her. If anything, it made her more thankful. One night, after returning home from a long day, she sat by her window with her old notebook. She opened to a blank page and began writing again. New notes, new melodies, new dreams. Outside, the city was quiet, the streetlights glowing faintly. She thought about her father, about how he would have smiled to see her now. "You were right," she whispered softly. "Music never really leaves us. It just waits for us to find it again." As she closed the notebook, she looked around her small room. The same walls, the same window, the same old photo on the desk. But everything felt different now. The world had opened up a little, and for the first time she wasn't afraid to step into it. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she was ready to face it. Whether she played for 10 people or 10,000, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was playing again. For herself, for her father, for anyone who needed to feel that music could still heal. And as the night wind brushed through her open window, she smiled quietly to herself. Her journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The next few weeks felt like a dream that she didn't quite know how to wake up from. Everywhere she went, someone seemed to recognize her now. Guests at the hotel would smile and whisper, "That's the pianist from the video." Some asked for photos. Others just wanted to shake her hand. At first it felt strange. She wasn't used to being noticed. For years she had walked through that same lobby without anyone even glancing her way. Now people stopped her, asking about her music, her story, and how it all began. She always answered with a shy smile and said, "It just happened one night." But while the world around her was changing, she tried hard to stay the same. She still cleaned tables, took orders, and helped the kitchen staff. When her co-workers teased her for being famous, she laughed it off. "I'm still just me," she would say. One evening, as she was about to leave work, the manager called her into his office. He looked excited but serious. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he said. A man in a dark blue suit stood near the window, holding a tablet in his hand. He smiled politely when she entered. "You're even more humble than people say," he said. "I've been trying to reach you for a week." She looked puzzled. "Reach me?" He nodded. "I work for a music company. We've been following your story online. Your song has gone viral, not just here but internationally. We'd like to talk about recording an album. Something small, something honest. You have a gift, and we'd love to help you share it." She blinked, unsure what to say. The room felt suddenly smaller. "An album?" she repeated softly. "Yes," he said, smiling. "Nothing fancy. Just your music, the way you play it. We'll handle the production. You just bring your heart." The manager beamed at her, clearly thrilled. But she stood quietly, her mind racing. This was everything she had once dreamed of. Yet now that it was in front of her, she didn't know if she was ready. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked gently. "Of course," the man said kindly. "Take all the time you need. Here's my card." When he left, she sat in silence for a moment. The idea of recording an album sounded exciting, but it also scared her. What if people expected too much? What if she failed? She wasn't trained or famous, just a waitress who happened to play one night. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the city lights flickering outside, and thought about her father. He had always told her, "Music is not about being perfect. It's about being true." Those words echoed in her mind. Maybe that was all she needed to remember. The next morning she called the studio manager, the kind man who had first helped her record her song. When she told him about the offer, he listened quietly. Then he said, "I think you should do it, but make sure it stays yours. Don't let them change who you are." She smiled softly. "That's what I'm afraid of," she admitted. "Then promise me you won't lose that honesty," he said. That's what people fell in love with. Not the notes, but the feeling. A few days later, she met with the music company again. This time, she felt calmer. She told them she would agree, but only if she could choose her songs and play them the way she wanted. The man nodded with respect. "That's exactly what we hoped for," he said. And so, her journey into the music world began. She recorded her album in a quiet studio, surrounded by people who understood her story. They didn't rush her. They let her play each song the way she felt it, some filled with joy, others with quiet sadness. Between sessions, she would sit by the piano and talk about her life, her father, and the night that changed everything. Those conversations became part of the music, too. The album took nearly a month to complete. When it was finally done, the producers suggested a small live show to celebrate its release. Nothing grand, just an evening with an audience who cared about her music. She agreed, though her hands trembled at the thought of performing again. The event was held at a cozy concert hall. elegant but warm with soft lights and rows of waiting seats. The day of the performance, she stood backstage, clutching her hands together, trying to steady her breathing. The same manager from the hotel came to see her. He smiled proudly. "No matter what happens out there, remember this. You've already made us proud." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. When her name was announced, the crowd clapped warmly. She walked onto the stage, dressed simply in a white blouse and long skirt. The piano gleamed under the soft lights. She took a deep breath, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out like a whisper, clear and gentle. The audience fell silent. As she played, she forgot about the people, the cameras, the expectations. It was just her and the music again, the same way it had always been. Every chord told a story. Every pause carried meaning. Halfway through, she closed her eyes and smiled faintly, feeling her father's presence in that room. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness before the hall erupted in applause. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even crying. She looked up, overwhelmed, her eyes shining. She didn't bow like a star. She just placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "Thank you." The concert ended, but the memory of it stayed with everyone who was there. Videos of that night spread online again, reaching people from all over the world. Her album began to sell, and radio stations played her songs. Gentle piano melodies that carried stories of courage, hope, and quiet strength. But through all the attention, she stayed humble. She still lived in her small apartment, still visited the studio where it all began, and sometimes still helped at the hotel when they were short-staffed. Fame hadn't changed her heart. It had simply given her a bigger stage to share it. One afternoon, while she was sitting at the studio, a young girl came in with her mother. The girl looked shy, holding a small notebook filled with song lyrics. "I wanted to meet you," the girl said softly. "Your music helped me when I felt scared to follow my dreams." The waitress smiled and knelt down to her level. "Then you must never stop," she said. "Dreams are quiet things, but if you listen, they'll tell you where to go." The girl hugged her, and for a moment, she felt the same warmth she used to feel when her father encouraged her as a child. That evening, as she walked home under the fading light, she thought about how far she'd come. Not long ago, she was just a waitress with a forgotten dream. Now, people listened when she played. But more than that, they felt something. That was worth more than anything else. A few weeks later, she received a letter from a well-known orchestra abroad, inviting her to perform as a guest pianist. They had heard her album and wanted her to play one of her original songs in their upcoming concert. She stared at the letter in disbelief. It was an opportunity of a lifetime. Still, she hesitated. It would mean traveling far from home, leaving her comfort zone again. Could she do it? Did she belong on a stage that big? That night, she sat at her piano, her hands resting on the keys. She thought about that first evening when she had stepped up to play at the charity dinner. Nervous, unsure, but brave. She realized that moment had started all of this. And just like then, she decided she would not let fear stop her. The next morning, she wrote a simple reply to the orchestra. "Thank you for believing in my music. I would be honored to play." When she mailed the letter, she felt a quiet joy in her heart. It wasn't about fame or success anymore. It was about honoring the journey, the struggle, the courage, the moments of doubt, and the light that had guided her through them all. As she walked down the street that morning, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the buildings around her. She smiled softly, knowing that every step she took had been worth it. From the long nights at the hotel to the trembling hands at the piano. She had once been just a girl who played to remember. Now she played to inspire, and deep inside, she knew this was only another beginning. The invitation from the orchestra felt unreal at first. The waitress held the letter in her hands for a long time, reading the words again and again. It was hard to believe that her story, which had started in a quiet hotel dining hall, had now reached people from across the world. She had been asked to perform at a grand concert in another country, in front of an audience filled with musicians, critics, and dreamers. When she told her coworkers, they were overjoyed. The kitchen staff clapped, the receptionist gave her a hug, and even the manager's eyes glistened with pride. "You deserve this," he said warmly. "You've worked hard, and now it's time for the world to hear what we heard first." Still, she felt nervous. It wasn't like the small cafes or charity dinners she had played before. This was something much bigger. Sometimes late at night, she'd stare at her reflection in the window and whisper, "Can I really do this?" But then she'd remember her father's words, that music isn't about being perfect, it's about being true. She had lived by that since the day she stepped up to the piano at the charity event, and she promised herself she would stay that way no matter how big the stage became. A month later, she boarded a plane for the first time in her life. The world below her looked like scattered pieces of light as the aircraft rose through the clouds. She sat by the window, her heart pounding with both excitement and fear. The studio manager had arranged everything, the travel, the accommodation, and even a small rehearsal space near the concert hall. When she arrived, the city was alive with music. Posters lined the streets and the name of the event glowed on banners, Symphony of Hope. Beneath the title, her own name appeared in smaller letters, Special Guest Pianist. She stared at it quietly, half smiling. A waitress from a hotel, she thought, and now this. The next few days passed in rehearsals. The orchestra welcomed her warmly. The conductor, an older man with kind eyes, shook her hand and said, "We've all heard your story. Your music carries something rare and honesty. That's what this world needs more of." During the first rehearsal, she sat at the grand piano in the center of the stage. The hall was empty except for the musicians around her, tuning their instruments. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play her original piece, The Promise. As her fingers moved, the orchestra slowly joined in, blending their sounds with hers. Strings rose softly behind her melody, the flutes danced lightly above, and the drums gave rhythm to her heart. When the final note faded, there was silence. A silence so deep it felt like the whole room was breathing with her. The conductor looked at her and smiled. "Beautiful," he said simply. "Play it like that on the night and they'll never forget you." Every day after that, she practiced until her hands ached. Yet it wasn't pressure that drove her, and it was gratitude. Every note she played felt like a thank you to everyone who had believed in her, from her co-workers to the kind studio man, to her late father who had planted this love in her heart. The night of the concert came faster than she expected. The hall was filled with people dressed elegantly, the air buzzing with anticipation. As she peeked from backstage, her heart fluttered. There were reporters, cameras, and faces she had only seen in magazines. She felt her throat tighten. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if I make a mistake? What if I don't belong here? Then, as if hearing her thoughts, the conductor came up beside her and said quietly, "Don't play for them. Play for yourself. That's why you're here," she nodded slowly. Those words brought her calm. When her name was announced, the audience applauded warmly. She walked out onto the stage, her step steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The grand piano waited under the soft glow of the spotlight. She took her seat, adjusted the bench, and let her fingers hover above the keys. For a few seconds, she didn't move. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then she began. The first notes were gentle, flowing like water. The melody rose and fell, carrying stories that words could never tell. Stories of long nights at the hotel, of quiet dreams, of courage found in unexpected moments. The orchestra joined her, their music wrapping around hers like light around shadow. Halfway through, she felt tears build behind her eyes, but she kept playing. She wasn't performing anymore, she was remembering. Every note was for her father, for the people who had lifted her when she had nothing, for the young girl who had once been too afraid to follow her heart. When the final note faded, the hall remained silent for a heartbeat, and then applause erupted. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The sound washed over her like a wave. She sat still for a moment, overwhelmed, before rising and bowing deeply. The conductor walked over, took her hand, and raised it high. The applause grew louder. Cameras flashed, but she barely noticed. Her heart was too full. Backstage, people congratulated her, some calling her performance the highlight of the night. But what mattered most to her was the feeling inside, a quiet peace. She had done it. She had stayed true to her music. Later that night, when the crowd had gone and the hall was empty again, she returned to the piano. The lights were dim now and the stage felt calm. She sat down once more and played softly just for herself. The sound echoed gently through the empty space. She smiled to herself. "We did it," she whispered, as if speaking to her father. The following morning, news of her performance spread quickly. Newspapers wrote about the waitress who played her way into the hearts of millions. Her story was everywhere again. But this time she wasn't overwhelmed by it. She had learned to let things flow naturally. Soon she received offers from different places, festivals, collaborations, interviews. But she didn't rush. She accepted only what felt right, always choosing spaces where the music mattered more than the spotlight. Months passed, and her life became a blend of travel and simplicity. She played in cities she had never seen before, met people from all walks of life, and shared her story with young musicians who dreamed as she once did. Yet, no matter where she went, she always found time to return home. She still visited the hotel sometimes, not to work, but to sit at the small piano in the corner of the dining hall, the same one where everything had begun. The staff would gather quietly as she played, smiling as the notes filled the room. One evening, after a small local concert, a woman approached her. She looked to be in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I was at the charity dinner that night," she said softly. "I remember when you stepped up to play. You changed something in that room and in me. Thank you." The pianist's eyes filled with emotion. "You have no idea what that means to me," she said. As they spoke, the woman said something that stayed with her forever. "You reminded us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it plays a quiet song." That night, when she returned home, she sat by her window again, the same window where she used to dream when life felt small and heavy. The city lights flickered below, and her piano waited by the wall. She opened her old notebook, now filled with new melodies and memories. Flipping to the last page, she wrote a few lines. "Dreams don't always start loud. Sometimes they whisper until you listen." She placed her hands on the piano and began to play a new tune, soft, hopeful, unfinished. It was a melody about beginnings and endings, about how one small moment can change everything. Outside, the night breeze carried her music through the open window. Somewhere down the street, a passerby stopped for a moment, listening to the faint sound of a piano. They didn't know who was playing or why, but for a brief second they smiled because it made them feel something, and that, she realized, was what she had always wanted. Not fame. Not applause. Just connection. Just a song that could touch another heart even for a moment. As the final note faded, she closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Her journey, from a quiet waitress to a musician known across the world, had taught her the most beautiful truth. The smallest acts of courage can echo the loudest. The next morning, as sunlight filled her room, she packed her small suitcase again. There were more places to go, more songs to share, more lives to touch. But before leaving, she glanced back at her piano one last time and smiled. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was her voice, her companion, her reminder that every dream, no matter how forgotten, can find its way back if you dare to take the first step. And with that, she walked out into the morning light, her heart full, her spirit calm, ready to begin another chapter.